Great. So just to recap, um, what changes have you seen since you've started with National Parents Organization?
Well, I remember, years ago, it seemed that the origins were, fathers' rights groups only, and the mission of the group seemed a little more gender focused, and it didn't have the scope of another 10, 15 years of results that affect children who are also female and ex-spouses and grandparents. And you realize that it's just a myopic glance at family court to declare it and only a gender issue. It's a full scope family issue. And so that focus led to the evolution of National Parents Organization, where we took a wider scope on the goals and the mission.
Great. So for the people who are just joining right now, take a moment and share this right now on your own page in any groups or any pages about divorce, separation, parental alienation. I am posting the link in the comments section. And the comment section is also where you can actually post questions for Stephen later. I'll be reading them to him. But just take this. So all you got to do is copy the link, go to your own page. I'm going to go to Ginger Gentile right now. And just share this live video. And that's how we get more and more people to watch. So please take a second and just share it to your page. I'm also going to share it to the Erasing Family page. It just takes 1 second. And Stephen, while you're doing that, tell me a little bit about also how have things changed in Pennsylvania since you started working with National Parents Organization?
Okay, I kind of lost you here as a visual. And I don't see a link, but
it's okay. Don't worry about that. Can you hear me?
I can now. And if you would, the question again, I'm sorry.
Sure. The question is, how have things changed in Pennsylvania since you started working with the National Parents Organization?
Right. Well, I think the big breakthrough was actually getting the bill drafted. Once you've done that, you've given people, a tool to carry, like the baton in the relay race to pass, something to work with, something to articulate. And that's the paradigm shift that's occurred here in PA. I had been doing some research for years, finding state legislators who were often actually being approached by retired judges who say, it's nice that the courts want to manage everything on a case-by-case basis, but you need to step in sometimes. And I think Representative Helm put the issue correctly before the hearing. It's a very, very important question to ask from a legislator's standpoint is, do we need legislation to fix the problem? Very often we see things done just to get on the news, and it doesn't make sense. And so the legislature actually stepping in is a big deal into the courts, into the other branch. So that is a very important decision to think about. I believe it is warranted actually in this case. And those judges who came out of retirement believe so also. They stepped forward and said, back when I was a judge, if a custodial parent didn't deliver the child for 3 weekends in a row and it took the non-custodial parent 6 months to get into court, he could at least at that time order replacement time right there on the bench. And the Bar Association won't let you do that now. They had been requiring you to go back to court and hold an entire modification hearing, wow, even though that time was ordered in that. So those are the types of bills that I was able to kind of pull out that were existing and get a feel for which legislators would be receptive to some reform and which ones are hearing the complaints of non-custodial parents and families.
Well, that's great news, Stephen. And I guess my other question is, Did any of those judges testify at the hearing?
Well, they did not, and often they don't want to.
Why don't they want to?
For a number of reasons. One, they prefer their anonymity and in a consulting position. Um, Two, sometimes it's too far for them and they're not in a great position to travel. And that's quite often the case within the Bar Association and the judiciary. I found I've gotten some surprising calls um, from judges and other attorneys that would prefer to remain anonymous.
Is that because they're afraid of the Bar Association and the power that the Bar Association has?
Yeah, nobody likes to, I mean, you're almost like in whistleblower status
Mm.
sometimes.
Right. So I think this is one of the key takeaways for anybody working on this issue and for all of our NPO chapters is that if you have a lawyer who's willing to come forward to speak out against the system or an ex-judge, really cultivate that relationship. Realize it might take a long time to cultivate that relationship, many meetings. But more and more lawyers I'm finding are willing to speak out against this, especially people who work in mediation and collaborative law, or people who went into divorce law because they are adult children of divorce who are traumatized. And NPO is very proud to have one such lawyer, Ashley Nicole Russell. She's based out of North Carolina, but she goes all over, who is working to enact joint custody legislation in North Carolina to help write the law and to speak out about this. So that's very powerful because she can speak as a traumatized child and as an attorney. Those people are very rare. So when you can find them, really develop those relationships, because if and Stephen made a good point, it's almost like a whistleblower because you're basically saying that you are breaking with the established way of doing business. So you have to be there and show them that they are on the right side of history and that there are other people who are supporting them. And I just want to give a shout out before we continue, Stephen, to some of the people on the call. We have Dawn from Florida, Michelle from California, George Ratrat from Minnesota, Will Mitchell from Kansas, and everybody who, if you haven't already, please take a second to share this on your own personal page or to share it on a page that you manage. I shared it to the Erasing Family page, and you just copy the link in the video I put in the comments section as well. And if you have any questions for Stephen, feel free to ask. Stephen, I know that there was a special guest who came all the way from a few states over to testify. Who was that guest and what impact did his testimony have?
Absolutely, Mr. Matt Hale. Very proud to have him on the team. And the significance of bringing Matt in was because he allowed us as a pioneer to show what the actual results are. We didn't have to guess what happens when you implement a presumption for equal parenting. And the statistics that he showed were taken the year before, the year during the temporary enactment, and the year after, a 3-year period. And it showed a dramatic drop in domestic violence incidents. And, the significance of that is it should be logical when you reduce the range of conflict over children and your life with children, you reduce the entire conflict, including violent results. They're situational. Very often these parents have never harmed anybody before, haven't committed a crime, haven't broken a law. But when you tell two parents, one of them's going to get the kids and the other one's going to be marginalized, are you surprised that we see domestic violence? It's a terrible way to approach the situation. And so those results that Matt reported really took the fire out of us having to refute the same old tired domestic violence statistics that are always skewed and projected in different ways. And it really took the oxygen out of it, that whole projection of statistics. So I was glad to have that. And there were some questions about it specifically from some of the House members. And it was great to have him there to produce the actual slides and data. So
Right.
we're happy to do that.
So just to recap for people, Kentucky is the only state with a default shared parenting bill. There's something similar in Arizona. It's the only state that gets an A on the shared parenting report card that NPO put out this September. And what Matt Hale found, and he used court data for this. This isn't a poll. This isn't an estimate. This is very important, that after shared parenting was enacted for a year, filings in family court or divorce filings went down significantly, I think over 10%, even though they've remained fairly stable and gone up in other states. And also the population in Kentucky did increase during that time. So this isn't that people moved out of the state, but also filings for domestic violence decreased. And a lot of domestic violence survivors and people who work in shelters, and this is in a lot of the op-eds and journalism that has been following this case, have shown that there is less cases of domestic violence, less people showing up in shelters, less cases being filed after shared parenting was passed. Now, we don't know exactly why, but the presumption is, as Stephen just said, less conflict leads to less violence. And we see a lot of cases where people become more violent after divorce. And I think a lot of people on this call right now can say, oh, I thought by getting divorced, things would get better. And the conflict just got worse, because when you can fight over your kids, when there is the option to have a custody battle, and I think this has to be a key point, we need to take away or make it very hard to even fight over custody. So another thing I want to ask you about, Stephen, is that a little joke that Matt told me, that it seemed like a lot of the people who are anti-shared parenting or anti-default shared parenting the bill started off their statements by saying, I like shared parenting and I support it, but.
Yeah.
And what was their but?
And the other, well, yeah, there was also like everybody's for equality, however. Those were the, the buts were right. I consider it a victory when they jump over that fence, that first fence of saying, okay, it's equal time, and then go to the dilemmas like, how are you going to split 7 days? And that kind of thing. They try and throw the logistics in the way.
Mm-hmm.
And, I at that point in time,
what about the logistics of a court trial and a custody battle that goes on for years, having to miss work to prove that you're a decent parent, pay a lawyer hundreds of dollars an hour? What about those logistics?
Yeah. And, in those cases, how about a little creativity? In those cases where there's the first year and it's 60-40, because nobody's made their real estate adjustments where they're living or their work adjustments. You say next year, we're going to reverse it. We're going to flip it every year. There you go. And, you don't have to look at things in terms, of this year's fiscal report, which is what they all seem to be worried about. Who gets the tax deduction this year? And, if you looked at it in terms of we're going to alternate a majority minority of time share throughout the years, they'd have a lot more respect for the other's position. When you have all the time and you don't get to do all those things and say the kids take you for granted for all the time they spend with you, like the custodial parents, complain about, you both equally share that. And you're much more cooperative, sympathetic, empathetic, and can enjoy those times when you need that freedom for your job or for whatever, and then you get the other time, with the kids.
Right.
You don't have to look at this as splitting a week. So I considered it a victory if they fell into that position. The other thing that Matt and I noticed from the agenda, the high altitude look at the agenda, there was only 2 parents listed on there, myself from National Parents Org and Justin Poe, who is from South Central PA. He's actually from the Judiciary Chairman's District. And I'm not saying that had anything to do with it, but we only had 2 parents against. The panels that admittedly are the ones that go behind closed doors, write these up, walk in, throw them on the desk and say, here's us, this is what we do, we're measuring ourselves, we like what we're doing, we'll continue doing this. And this bill didn't get drafted that way. This bill didn't go to the Judiciary Committee initially. We found an independent state rep who had the bill drafted, and you could just tell, you just felt like shock and awe and betrayal from all those committees that thought, hey, we've been doing a great job drafting this stuff. Why'd you go around us? We'll fix this. We'll work. Excuse me, you'll hear my voice go out from time to time. I have a bad flu.
Okay.
So,
well,
yep.
well, also the other thing I noticed is that in one of the news reports, they highlighted, it was first of all very favorable to NPO and to all the shared parenting advocates, the news coverage. And then the clip they pulled from one of the lawyers was, well, we have a 16-point scale on to determine who gets custody. And I think really moving forward, we have to talk about the whole point of shared parenting isn't to ensure that each parent has 180 days of the year. The point is to reduce conflict, that parents are starting off from the same point as they are if they're married or living together, and that hopefully this reduction in conflict will allow them to just discuss or work out what is the best schedule that works for them and their kids. Because 16 points, in my mind, means you have to pay for custody evaluators, guardian ad litems, psych evals for parents who are not convicted of any crime, parents who are otherwise fit, and when they were married, nobody suspected anything. Their kids weren't taken away. And we really have to start talking about that. What family court does is take away custody. It never gives custody to anybody.
Right.
Because it is assumed you have custody of your kids when they're living with you or when you're married.
Right.
And go ahead.
Yeah, and those 16 points, I mean, if you can imagine, I watch, the Olympics and, the figure skating. Imagine the judges have 16, facets of this, the music, the choreography, the costume. But none of them are weighted. You could just go right down the list, see the last one and say, all right, you're 300 miles apart. Screw it. This is what we're going to do. You're primary. There is no science to that. It's absolutely complete art to it.
Right.
So all they have to do is fill something out in each of those lines, and then you can't even appeal it, and you're back to whatever discretion. And we all know, the little dirty secrets of family court that aren't secrets. You could take the same case into 100 different judges and get 100 different results from the facts in different counties. So that's what you get with discretion. And we're looking for laws that are a little more predictable. We know that attorneys love wide ranges. They love to tell you, oh, you could go to jail for 6 months to 20 years, depending on how I perform for you in court. So, their services are certainly worth a lot more than if they told you you did this and you're going to jail for 2 years and there's nothing to be argued about. There'd be nothing to pay. So that's how the ranges work.
Right. So I think another great phrase, and this was invented by the professor Jennifer Hartman, who's in my documentary Racing Family, and she's also the person who did the polling behind the 22 million parents in the U.S. can't see their kids after divorce or separation, are being alienated from their kids. So she said judicial discretion is another name for judicial bias. And that's because when there's no scientific reasoning, so a parent who beats the crap out of their kids, we can say that parent shouldn't have the kids. But a parent who maybe gives one type of food or the other, these are normal range parenting activities. The loyalty that kids feel towards one parent will shift over their lives. They might get angry at one parent, maybe because the parent rightfully didn't let them smoke a cigarette or do drugs. They might not want to spend time with that parent if they're a teenager. And might go to court and say, I don't want to see my dad anymore because his house is too strict. So these are all normal range behaviors that become criminalized in family court, and there's no backup. And also Dr. Craig Childress, who actually went to Pennsylvania, though he didn't testify, he said something too, either you're fit to have your kids half of the time or you're not fit. There's a problem. But nobody's fit only to have their kids 20% of the time. So this whole custody battle industry, is not is just about money making. So if people want to ask a question, because we're going to be wrapping up in a few minutes, because Stephen graciously agreed to do this even though he's coming down with a bit of a flu. So Christian Stahl has a great comment. It was clear that the Pennsylvania House Judiciary has no familiarity with the law's application. So how can we, Stephen, illustrate the craziness that is family court? Because on paper, it sounds okay. You have a judge who's unbiased, who will listen to both sides, weigh the evidence, and do what's in the best interest in the children. Obviously, that's not what's happening. We see more and more people who can't see their kids. We see a lot of mothers who are losing custody. So how can we illustrate better to the people who haven't gone through this how crazy it is?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question because it allows me to say one of the glaring observations I had sitting there was that when you're talking about changing a system, this would be like if you owned a hospital and you wanted to change the admissions program and the qualifications and the diagnosis, your best practices. That's what we're talking about doing with family law here. And the people who are supposed to be the experts on it came up with anecdotal case stories. Not one of them, you look through there, will tell you how many cases they manage, what the percentage outcomes are. They can't give you any data, mega data regarding their performances. We had 6 attorneys come up and pull out I had a case, with the one-legged person who flew and lived in, Alaska, whatever. Crazy cases, extremes, they're the exceptions, they're not the rule. I just could not believe the anecdotal informality level that they sat and gave their opinions about without actually looking at, the hard numbers, what they're producing. And I was actually waiting along those lines for domestic violence to give me some statistical results. And you really can't argue with them because it's probably the only place I can think of in government where there are no gender statistics kept by results.
Interesting.
So, the fact that they had all those experts in there and none of them could tell you what the specific ratios, I'm probably the only one who had them at the table that day. It
Wow.
was amazing. Yep.
Well, and this is also a big problem in family court is that I often get asked for statistics and have to say these statistics don't exist. National Parents Organization has done a great job reviewing laws, and they're going to release a big report on child support. Jennifer Hartman has her polling data, but family court is secretive. It's very hard to do research. A lot of states don't even have computerized records. So today someone said, tell me how many cases involve an accusation of violence. It's like, I have no idea. Maybe it's 1%, maybe it's 100%, because nobody keeps these statistics. And I say too, we haven't tried this as a strategy, but if you're in a state where you're like, there's no way I can get any sort of shared parenting passed, consider asking them just to pass a law to keep statistics.
Yeah.
And to follow up with the families 1, 3, and 5 years later to see how satisfied families are with the family court process. Because that to me is, and this also caused a huge scandal in Australia because they had an inquiry on family law in Australia. And one member of parliament very innocently asked, well, what are the outcomes for people who go through family court? And the judge says, we have no idea. And he's like, what do you mean you have no idea? Well, what happens when you follow up? He's like, we don't follow up. There's no follow-up because they expect you to go back to court if there's a problem, which is more money, more time. And a lot of people are like, well, nothing's going to happen, so why bother? Anything to say to that, Stephen, before we get to some questions?
Mm-hmm. I'm okay there. Go ahead.
Okay. So one good question, what is the current status of the bill in Pennsylvania? So like, where is it right now? What could happen next?
Yeah. I have some calls and emails going back and forth on it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think could change tomorrow. My hope is that it is amended. Okay. And the reason being is when I had it drafted, I put everything in it. It was, everything that we wanted in it. The presumption, the requirement that a judge actually justify in writing, and we actually did something Kentucky didn't, and we increased the level of evidence required. I have to pause there and admit
Evidence
that the
required for what?
for a threshold for findings of unfitness and domestic violence and
Okay.
such. I was amazed at how many times I heard attorneys and people defending the current law actually saying this: we don't have that kind of evidence in family court. We never have that evidence. It's he said, she said. I was stunned. I thought that made the entire strategy of putting that clause in there worthwhile 100%. It can always be lowered so that we get the front end of the bill done. But I left it on there, and I am so glad I did. I am going to highlight that and play it over and repeat it. We don't have that evidence in family law. It's he said,
That's
she
a great
said.
idea.
So we are taking away people's parenting rights because we routinely cannot establish evidence that would be clear and convincing. So, we will send people to jail, or we will give people who risk going to jail for 6 months a public defender, a presumption of innocence, a criminal standard for evidence and burden of proof. But we won't give that when we take a child or marginalize a parent from a child.
Wow.
It's just absurd. And
That
they
is
are so
absurd.
comfortable saying it. I couldn't believe they were so comfortable, of course. So that was, in my opinion, one of the best strategies come forth, in a positive way, where I would have preferred to have a public hearing than I would have passed a bill in a more watered down form. I might have been able to get it, pushed through in a more watered down form, in a slogan format, where everybody's equal. Now let's go back to doing what we're doing. But putting those stumbling blocks in it for that hearing really gives us another whole nother bill if we want to. So there is discussions about what they're going to do with it, whether they're just going to, put it off to the side in the shelf, whether they will put a working committee together to amend it again. But I doubt it will be passed in its current form right now.
Okay. So to clarify 2 points, the first is that the current bill is still in a subcommittee, and this was a subcommittee hearing, right?
Correct.
So this bill isn't even in the judicial committee. There's not a vote on this. This is just subcommittee. I think what's amazing is how many people, Stephen, would you estimate showed up to support the bill in a subcommittee hearing?
Yeah, I think that there were probably close to, 60, maybe 70. I couldn't see out the hallway later.
Wow.
People that came to it. And, honestly, there are bills that I remember working on that got so much more press and were in the news. And, for example, when we required the governor to sign a pardon board recommendation up or down within 60 days, it was covered by the news all over the place, but it only affected a handful of people each year. And this bill is, it's a tremendous volume. I told you we have 46 to 48,000 divorce cases, child custody divorce cases in Pennsylvania each year.
Yeah.
So we have typically pending in there about 150 to 200,000 from the prior 2-3 years. And this would have a dramatic effect on the case loads.
Right. So the other thing I wanted to point out is that just by talking about this and by having hearings, we put pressure on the family court system and the politicians and the media to see what's going on, to admit to things like they don't use evidence in family court, that they have no idea what the outcomes are. And this is important because not just does it draw attention, but in Ohio, Don Hubin, who's the chair of National Parents Organization, published a study. Not all states do this, but each county in Ohio has a different default parenting time plan. Most were not shared parenting. And just by publishing this on a map, that depending on the county, you would get different amount of time. 5 counties switched to shared parenting being an option or being the starting point. And this wasn't through a protest movement. It wasn't through a bill. It's just by sharing the data so people can see where they're at. So this is a really important part. George Richat says, of the 60 present, how many for and against? So again, George, the 60 in the room were for the bill. The only people who were really against it were the lawyers testifying. And what I thought was interesting is that this was a subcommittee hearing. So it really was a small room. And a lot of people showed up for a subcommittee hearing. This wasn't the whole Senate. This wasn't a vote. This was not even in committee yet. And I have a lot of people asking a few questions that are the same. So first of all, if you're saying like, hey, I want to do something similar in my state, or I'm in Pennsylvania, how can I get involved? Go to nationalparentsorganization.org. You can find your state affiliate. We've just opened up 6 new affiliates since June. Or you can join an affiliate, and all of our affiliates are vetted to make sure they meet high community standards. They have to sign a code of conduct, and they also get a lot of training as well. And a lot of people ask us to share our training materials, and we're very clear that we want to make sure people are trained and prepared to use them, that they're vetted, that they sign our code of conduct. Because someone said, oh, can you send us like a copy of like sample legislation? And we're like, we can do that, but if you don't have the organizational skills like Stephen has, and his background to get it through, it's not really working. So Stephen, a lot of people did ask, where can they read this bill? So if people say, I want to read what you're trying to get passed in Pennsylvania, where could they find that?
Yeah, if you simply Google Pennsylvania legislature, it'll bring you to the main page, and it'll give you House and Senate, bills. You can look it up by number, you can look it up by topic. So it should be pretty easy, to kind of just Google and find the House Bill 1397.
So I'm going to write that there, House Bill 1397.
Yeah.
And also the entire video of the hearing is on the website too.
Right. Yeah. Now
go ahead.
And so, we're not dead. We're not done yet. There's a couple ways to skin a cat, and we're not done with the topics of bills that we will be introducing. I was talking with Don, and the next torpedo we're putting in the chamber has to do with visitation enforcement for existing orders out there, and parents who are having great difficulty just having that order enforced.
And that's great because that had a lot of success in Missouri, where we have Linda Reitzel, who's heading the NPO chapter there. And basically what the Missouri law says is that you don't have to go back to court to enforce a custody order. It's fast tracked, so it's less money, less time. I have a few really quick questions. Someone just posted the actual bill, which is great. So Tony Bickle says, how did you get that many people to attend the hearing?
Well,
it's a lot of work, and it was years that went into the hearing.
Yeah, there's been, I've been holding rallies for parental alienation for 8 years up there, and I've seen a lot of parents come and go. Some are frustrated, some are here, for their kids or to get attention to their case, and others, kind of stick in for a long time. So there's been an overlap of that. I had a couple, we had a parental alienation working group here in Cumberland with Susan Abel and a Dan Heim, and we, worked on the side. So over the years, there's always been kind of a, 10 or 20 person float, coming to these rallies and popping up at different times. So there's that. I think this time, the fact that we actually announced at the parental alienation rally back in April that we actually had a bill that have helped to gain some momentum. And then we have a very exuberant organizer here, Lori, and she's been carrying the mantle of trying to get people to travel to the Capitol. And so we had that. Keep in mind, I've got a lot of staff and friends up here as well, because I've been living here for 11 years and I worked here for several years before that on staff. So all things combined, social media helps. That will fill, if you didn't fill it with staff and regular people, social media certainly helps to fill the room there.
So one thing that also NPO can help with is we have a database of over 25,000 people across the U.S., which we can target by state to get the word out about these hearings. We also provide trainings on how to recruit people. You can use the Erasing Family film as an organizing tool. And then I have a question from Dawn McKendry, who is the chair of the Florida chapter. She just started off doing that this year. She's also a big supporter of Erasing Family, and she's an erased daughter who was lucky to reunite with her father a few years ago before he passed on. She asked, let me see, did anyone consider having former erased children present to testify or oppose the attorneys arguing against the bill?
I can tell you that we did have a professional pop up at the rally last spring, parental alienation rally, and she does counseling for families who have been through the court process and are traumatized by the alienation factor. And she gave great testimony and let her know, and her opinion not only came from her education and professionalism, but she was a child of parental alienation, so she really got it, and it was a good impact.
But this testimony was at the rally, not at the hearing.
Yes, she did supply it in writing, which I hand delivered because she's actually from the subcommittee chair person's district, Cheryl Delosier. So I hand delivered that one.
Well, this is also something to think about moving forward. It's very hard to find children who are willing to testify, and adult children. But again, just like judges and lawyers who are willing to speak out, they are relationships to cultivate. So I think we're out of time. Just to recap, one last comment from River Flows. I had the choice of seeing my kids 2 nights per month or going to family court as my ex was unwilling to use collaborative law. I have them 50-50 now. It took 3 years and many dollars. A 50-50 presumption could have helped greatly. So that's what we're doing. Again, if you're like, I want to get involved, either by being a volunteer, so maybe you want to help with research, grant writing, NPO has a definite need for national-based volunteers who maybe aren't doing the work Stephen's doing, but who want to help. Please contact us, National Parents Organization. We have a great volunteer out of Florida who's now helping us with grants, for example. And if you're like, I want to do something similar in my state, you can also check to see if there is an affiliate in your state and contact them. We have almost 25 affiliates now. We keep on putting so many new in, it's hard for me to keep track of the number. Or contact the affiliate in your state who would be in charge of incorporating you and having you sign the code of conduct. And then you have all these training materials, and we really make sure that all of our members uphold a code of conduct. And also, if you're like, well, how did my state do? Go to our website, or we even have a direct URL, super easy to remember, sharedparenting.org. And you can find out how your state did on the NPO's 2019 Shared Parenting Report Card. You can see our great press conference at the Lincoln Center to release it, where we had Ashley Nicole Russell, who's the adult child of divorce and collaborative lawyer, speak. We had America's psychologist, Dr. Jeff Gardere, speak, Warren Farrell speak, and the leader of Amazing Moms Without Custody speak, and also a child divorce. And you can see how your state did. Stephen, how did Pennsylvania do on the Shared Parenting Report Card? Do you remember the grade?
I think we were a D or a D plus.
D.
Yes.
Not a D plus, even a D.
Yes, even worse. Right.
Yes.
Good. Yeah. So I've been
So
staring at things too long today. So
it's
yeah,
okay. So just to
yeah,
wrap up, one last comment. Julie Levan, I'm an attorney, not family law. I'm saddened by what other attorneys are doing, and the judges are misled by inaccuracies and manipulation. Right on, Julie. Julie, if you find a family law lawyer who thinks like you, please email NPO. We would love to have them testify, write blogs for us, get involved, be part of the solution. So again, thank you so much, Stephen. Again,
you are.
you can see we have the link to the bill there. It's still in subcommittee, but I think 2020, not think, I believe, I know 2020, we're going to pass shared parenting laws all over the country because people have had enough. And remember, this is not a fringe issue. 93% in the last poll that NPO did support default shared parenting. Nothing polls that high, and that's 93% support. All genders, all ages, all political affiliations. So the only people who are opposing this are the lawyers and the politicians.
Yep.
Nobody else. We're on the right side of history with this one. So thank you so much, Stephen, for your hard
Thank
work
you.
doing this.
Yep.
And I hope you feel better and have a good night, everybody. And thanks for listening. If you haven't already, please share this on your page. Thank you.
Very good. Thanks, Jeannie.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.